Morning, all. All right, so what we're doing today is, well, I took the four divisions from yesterday and I just reversed everything. So Buffalo was at the bottom over here yesterday. Now they're at the top over here. So what you can do is you can take this image and go, that's what Shannon thinks the standings are going to be this year. Wow, what a radical prediction that is. It really doesn't matter. I haven't even done any kind of an official. It even matter. I don't know. I also want to say the New York Rangers logo. I know there are Rangers fans that are saying they've never seen it and they're surprised I'm using it. This is a New York Rangers. It's the exact same as this, and it's right on the back of the little mugs they had. So I've seen it before. It's the first time I've had it on a magnet. I think it's all right. I like to have things that are a little bit different, and I don't have a Liberty magnet in that size, so why not? All right. So, while there's grand disappointment in which magnets I use for which teams, let us go ahead and talk about something today that involves all 32 teams. Players that may be missed by these 32 teams. They may not. We can have that debate in the comment section. But I do want to say that Seattle, it's tongue-in-cheek. So we'll start with Seattle as an example here. Seattle, obviously, as I said, tongue-in-cheek. That it's Vitek Vanacek, goaltender, going to Washington. Undefeated in his time in Seattle. Raise that jersey to the rafters, retire that number, all this other wonderful stuff. I will say that Seattle on their social media have been fantastic when they've traded out a player. Ron Francis trades somebody, they Photoshop just the S onto the player's chest. They leave the rest of the jersey the same and thank him for his time in Seattle and say he'll be greatly missed. I absolutely love that, and I think teams should be doing that from now on when there's a three-way deal. So like Hoffman going through San Jose. Absolutely, next time we see those three-way deals where a guy passes through one city to go to another, doesn't play a game there, I want to see some Photoshop, and I want to see that team tweeting out, thank you for your service and for your dedication to the team. You will be missed. All right, so that one aside, just because I have to get something out there, right? Let's start things off with Buffalo. Now, Buffalo, it's a player who's still there, but is he? So I'm trying not to double up players, so I don't really need to talk much about Sam Reinhart and all of that, but yeah, what happens without Jack Eichel? What are they going to get back for Jack Eichel? Is it going to be enough? And if you're a Sabres fan, you're probably going to say, no, it won't be enough. And so we're still stuck here looking at Jack Eichel's situation, asking when this is going to get cleared up. Jack Eichel is a very, very talented forward who's gone through a very rough last 12 months. And so where's he going to end up? When is he going to have his surgery? Is he going to be able to have that surgery? Because again, Buffalo is saying no to that surgery right now. So we'll see how that turns out, right? And what they get back. But Jack Eichel, you would think, whether it's that he's traded or that he doesn't report, like he kind of has to. He's under contract, so he kind of has to report, right? I don't know how far this goes. Detroit. Now, I love everything that Steve Yzerman does. Luke Glendening going to Dallas. I think that's a nice pickup for Dallas, who lost a player that I'll be talking about in a bit here. But Glendening's a good replacement for the player that I feel Dallas lost that they're going to have a hard time making up for. But with Detroit, they didn't trade Glendening at the deadline. I was pretty sure then that meant that Yzerman was going to hold on to him. Instead, he goes unrestricted free agency and signs somewhere else. Excellent face-off man. Absolutely excellent. The offensive numbers aren't really there. Oddly enough, if you look up his profile on the NHL site, most of the highlights are goals he scored against Dallas last year. So hopefully Jim Nill saw him in games that weren't just against his own team. Because if he was just watching Glendening against his own team, he'd be saying, wow, this guy's got a really good scoring touch. I don't know what the problem is. Just against Dallas. So Ottawa, now this isn't a player that I think they're going to overly miss, but I'll be interested to see if he bounces back this year. Evgeny Dadonov. And the two I's is the proper spelling as far as I can tell. We often see it with a Y. I don't think it makes a huge difference. But Evgeny Dadonov, who had a great time of it in Florida, rough time of it in Ottawa, now he moves on to Vegas. How is that going to turn out for him? And for Ottawa, that veteran that they brought in, it just didn't work. So, will Ottawa have a harder time navigating things without that veteran leadership, or will it come from elsewhere? So, again, Dadonov, older player, I think 32. So we'll see if he bounces back in Vegas. Montreal, it's a player that technically is still a member of the Montreal Canadiens, but Shea Weber is supposed to go on LTIR and likely miss the entire season. And I do think there are Montreal fans that are downplaying it, that are absolutely downplaying it and going, well, we got Savard, so that should make up the difference. And I like Savard. I don't think it makes up the difference. Honorable mention as well to Philippe Danault, who I talked about yesterday, going to the LA Kings. Losing their face-off man, their solid defensive center, and losing their arguably maybe second best defenseman, if you want to argue Petrie's the best, but still, it's one of your top defensemen. That hurts. And so I do think Montreal will have a hard time this season without Shea Weber in the lineup. I do think that's going to make a difference for them. I will say this. I've always found it weird in the offseason how quickly fans will turn against a player who leaves or a player who's injured. Where it'll be, well, we don't really need him anyways. Where during the season, I will see posts from those same accounts talking about how great that player is, how great the team is, and how unstoppable that player is. And then as soon as he's hurt, we didn't need him anyways. He wasn't that good. He really, I know I said all those things, but he really isn't that good. And same when they leave. That it's, well, we didn't need him anyways. He's not a big deal. Okay. It can't really be both of those things though, can it? So with Weber, again, I do see some downplaying like, it'll be fine. But didn't Montreal fans think Weber was awesome as recently as like a month ago? All right, Toronto. The honest answer with Toronto might have been Zach Hyman, but we've talked a lot about Zach Hyman. I think it's somewhere else. Now, this past season, Freddie Anderson had a poor year. He did. Before this past season, Freddie Anderson, he had his hot streaks here and there, and I did get a chuckle out of it that if he had a really good record over 10 games, you would start seeing articles about whether or not he was Vezina worthy and if he should be in contention for the Vezina. Because, again, it's that everything's awesome, everything sucks thing, right? So, for Freddie, I never really bought as much into the Vezina talk as I would see sometimes, but I also don't buy into the idea that he's a terrible goaltender. So we'll see if he has a bounce back with Carolina and how that swap of Mrazek for Anderson ends up working out. Boston, and it basically ends up being a swap. They signed each other's free agent goaltender. Boston, this may finally be the year that for Boston fans who hate Tuukka Rask, they may no longer have that excuse. They may no longer have that excuse to turn to and go, well, it's all Tuukka's fault. So this year, if Tuukka does not decide to return, and I would think it's 50-50. I was kind of surprised he came back this past season at all. If he doesn't come back, it's on Swayman, it's on Ullmark. And so we'll see. And they can't blame Halak either. He's moved on to Vancouver. So without Tuukka Rask, I do think there are some question marks about Boston's goaltending because of how strong Tuukka Rask's play has been for as long as it has. And I understand that there are people who will complain about his playoff record, but it's not that bad. It really isn't. And so we'll see how things go for Boston. Florida. In Florida, it's interesting. Trying to find a loss in Florida, it's not easy. And Alex Wenberg signs as a free agent with Seattle. And that's the first Seattle player on the board. There's a lot of Seattle players on the board, though. They did cause a lot of overturn. Wenberg, 17 goals this year. He played pretty well for Florida. I don't know that he will get 17 goals for Seattle, but he probably will end up close. And again, that's as close as I could come to finding a loss for Florida. And I understand they added Reinhart, so they get stronger up front. Wenberg was as close as I could come. They're doing very well right now with not losing big players, big names, and anybody. They're not losing anybody they can't replace either. Tampa. Tampa's interesting. I'm going to put up here that it's depth. And here's why. So you lose Coleman to Calgary. You lose Gord to Seattle. You lose Savard. He goes to Montreal. You lose Johnson. He goes to Chicago. You lose Goudreau. Goudreau goes to the New York Rangers. And I'm sure I could continue. I'm already down to the bottom of what the camera can see. A lot of players lost for Tampa this year. So getting that third in a row, it's going to be interesting to see how things turn out. Tampa's lost a lot of depth. That's a lot of expensive depth too, though. You look at how much those guys are making. Tampa couldn't afford to keep them. But how Tampa deals with that is going to be very, very interesting. Because really, the depth for Tampa has been gutted. Moving on to the Metro. Over in the Metro, you've got Columbus. For Columbus, how much do they feel the loss of Seth Jones? And that, again, is a question where people in the advanced stats community would say they won't miss Seth Jones nearly as much as people think. And for others, it's going to be, he plays a ton of minutes. There are a ton of important minutes. They're going to miss him. I'm kind of on the fence with this one. So you guys can let me know what you think. Because I can understand both sides. That he's overrated on some levels, but he also does play those tough minutes. New Jersey didn't lose a lot either in the offseason. So I went with Will Butcher. I thought about Ryan Murray as well. But they added Dougie Hamilton. So I don't think that anybody's going to say, man, this Dougie guy's good. But we really miss Butcher. I like Butcher, but not over Hamilton. So New Jersey's done a pretty good job. They haven't really lost anybody who's major to their attack. Rangers. For the Rangers, and this is a repeat of a name the last time I did a list like this, and that's Pavel Buchnevich, who of course went to St. Louis. It will be interesting to see how the Rangers handled the loss of Buchnevich. The good news being, of course, you got a lot of good young forwards like Lafreniere, like Kakko, who should start producing more points and more goals and should make up for the loss of Buchnevich. So we'll see how it goes. Again, it feels like there's some redundant pieces maybe up front, and that's what the new general manager was looking at and said, we're going to move some guys out here. Philadelphia. For the Flyers, so I mentioned with Boston, you've got Tuukka Rask to blame every time they lose. Jacob Voracek gets a lot of blame when Philly loses. Voracek being gone means you got to find yourself another target. It's probably going to be Giroux then that's going to get a lot of the blame. Gostisbehere's gone, of course, as well. So there are definitely some players who take a lot of blame that are gone out of Philly. We'll see what it is this year and why it's Carter Hart, right? What reason there's going to be to blame Carter Hart when things go wrong. New York Islanders, they didn't lose a ton either, but Seattle helped them out with their cap problem by taking Jordan Eberle. I don't know that that's the player Lou Lamoriello wanted to lose to Seattle, but Eberle is a loss, 20-goal scorer, good player, and I think Seattle fans are going to like him, and I think the Islanders have players within their organization who can fill in. That's the thing. A lot of these guys you may see on this board probably going to get filled in by younger players, probably some cheaper talent here and there too, with the flat cap being as it is and all. For speaking of capitals, I went with Brendan Dillon. And I do wonder about Washington's depth too. It is one thing that I do kind of scratch my head about with the Capitals, is whether or not their depth is going to be enough to keep them up there this year and keep them in the top 10 in the NHL, or if this is where we're going to start to see kind of a fallback. Mentioned in the video yesterday that I don't think Washington's happy just with one Stanley Cup. I don't think there's anybody in the organization that's happy with that. And so I think there will be a push to try to get Ovi at least a second cup ring. We'll see how it goes. Losing Dillon hurts. Pittsburgh. There were a number of guys I could have gone with for Pittsburgh. Another Seattle player. Brandon Tanev. Brandon Tanev doesn't score a lot of goals and a lot of points. He's not really a flashy player, but he does everything pretty well. Good defensive player as well, and he's a glue guy. He is that kind of character player that you just feel like he gets along well with his teammates. They appreciate having him there, and I again, Seattle fans are probably going to enjoy watching Brandon Tanev play. It's kind of hard not to enjoy watching Brandon Tanev play, and I'm saying that as somebody who watching Penguins games have enjoyed watching Bluger and Tanev the most of their forwards. Carolina, I went back and forth on this. I'm gonna go with the chicken's way out on this, but there's honestly two. So I'll go with Dougie Hamilton. I talked about Dougie Hamilton going to New Jersey and what that means to New Jersey. Going from Carolina to New Jersey likely means a drop in his points, I would think, at least on some level. I don't think it's going to be dramatic, but I don't think he's going to be able to score as many in New Jersey as he did in Carolina. Maybe he does, but I think there'll be a drop in points per game. I do think Carolina's going to miss him. I think that they're going to be okay because Carolina's depth on the blue line is impressive, but you can't lose somebody like Hamilton and not miss him. And I wanted to put Nedeljkovic up there. But when I thought about it, I thought, no, Hamilton was more important for longer. Nedeljkovic was really important this past season. Before this season, there was no telling as to whether or not Nedeljkovic was going to end up panning out at the NHL level. So I went with Dougie Hamilton. Moving over now to the Pacific. And starting with Anaheim. Anaheim, really, honestly, no big losses for them. Would have been Getzlaf, but Ryan Miller retired. And I thought about wearing a Ryan Miller Ducks jersey for this video. I personally, myself, I'll miss Miller. I understand that he didn't have a great season and Stolarz looked good. It's Stolarz and Gibson this coming year. I'm allowed to say I'll miss a player. I'll miss Miller. San Jose, this is an interesting one. So Martin Jones moves on to Philly, where there's going to be some pressure for him to turn his game around. If Martin Jones turns his game around in Philly, that might be a bit of an indictment to San Jose on some level, whether that's on their defense, on their goaltending coaching, or, just how they handle Martin Jones. It will be interesting to see how that goes because of the fact that Jones's play was subpar for 2.5 seasons. But when he was hot, he still looked really good. It's just it didn't last long enough. He would get a save percentage above 900, and then it would nosedive again. So we'll see. LA, I could not find anybody from LA's team that finished out the season that I could say, well, there's a substantial miss. I can't get there with McDermott. I can't. So I'm going to put an asterisk because this is a player that they traded at the deadline. I went with Jeff Carter because Carter, solid forward for them, good veteran presence. Do they miss him this year? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. And again, they've brought in Dano, but Dano is a completely different center than Carter. So yeah, we'll just see. And again, asterisk there because Carter was already gone before the end of the season, which does kind of feel like a cheat when I didn't do that with anybody else. Vancouver. It is going to be weird seeing Alex Edler in another jersey. I get why Vancouver didn't keep him. I get why he moved on. But I liked Edler. He had his up and down years. He had years where I was very upset with him. There were videos on the channel where I would talk about, I get upset with him for turnovers or whatever it was. But I always felt like Canucks kind of overplayed him. So I'll be interested to see if the Kings, are able to keep his minutes down a little bit so he's more effective. And how he plays against Vancouver. Does he end up scoring goals against Vancouver? Does he get that 100th goal against the Canucks? That would kind of be the most Canuck thing that could happen, right? So I'll go ahead and say yes. Calgary. For the Flames, Mark Giordano. Mark Giordano, captain of the team. They tried to keep him. Brad Treliving tried to make a deal with Seattle. Seattle was asking for a first-round pick, and Calgary said no. And I understand them saying no. At this point in time, Giordano is not going to be the Norris Trophy winning Giordano that he was, but at the same time, it is hard to see him not playing for Calgary this coming season. It's going to be just more weird, I would think, for Flames fans. with losing Giordano than it is for Canuck fans losing Edler, because we kind of knew Edler was leaving. Giordano, it kind of came out of left field. Edmonton. With Edmonton, there were a few names I could have used for this one. I'm gonna go ahead and say Adam Larsson, even though Ethan Bear could end up being a bigger loss, but Larsson, who I understand offensively doesn't have a lot to give, defensively he's fantastic. Defensively, he's absolutely fantastic, and you want a guy who's defensively fantastic playing with your offensive defenseman so he can play his game. And you've got a guy like Larsson covering. So maybe they see Cody Ceci being able to play that role for them as well. We'll see how that goes. Or maybe Duncan Keith is going to be asked to play that role for them too. For Vegas, it has to be Fleury, right? There really isn't anybody else this can be. Marc-Andre Fleury has been the most recognizable member of the Vegas Golden Knights from day one. It is going to be bizarre to see him in a Chicago jersey. It is going to be strange to see him not playing for Vegas this year. Because, my money was on him retiring as a Vegas Golden Knight. When he signed that $7 million a year contract, it was with that idea that he would retire as a Vegas Golden Knight. That was the plan. And now he's in Chicago, which was not part of the plan. So, I'll be interested to see how Vegas does without Fleury. Moving over to the Central, Arizona. Now, when I talked about Vancouver and players I was most looking forward to watching play, I talked about Connor Garland. But from a Arizona standpoint, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, as the loss he is as a team captain and everything, that's a pretty big change for them on the blue line. And so while I look for them to adapt and to make the necessary changes, how are things going to go? Arizona, it looks like, probably tore things down for this year, likely with the draft in mind, where they have almost all the draft picks. But Ekman-Larsson, it is a very sizable loss, and it's interesting that, this is so soon in this video after I've talked about Edler and Giordano, guys who probably should have spent their entire career in one city. Ekman-Larsson, much the same thing with Arizona. So we'll see how all three of those guys do. For Chicago, another defenseman that I thought would spend his entire career in one city. Duncan Keith. That again, I figured would retire as a Blackhawk. But now he's in Edmonton, and we'll see how things go for him there. The thing with Keith, I know he didn't have a very good year this past season, but he's capable of having good years. And I know whenever I've done videos on top 20 defensemen, there will be Hawks fans that say, well, why not Keith? Keith is still one of the best in the game. Again, now that they've moved on from Keith, that opinion may change, but there are still times where Duncan Keith has that ability to take over a game, and maybe with a change of scenery, that'll help. Nashville, another defenseman. This has been an amazing offseason for defensemen, but for Nashville, losing Ryan Ellis, they are a factory when it comes to defensemen. They just create more. They produce more and more and more defensemen. At some point, you would have to think that's going to become an issue where they may not have the depth. But losing Ellis means more responsibility for Fabro, I would think, right? And so we'll see how things go. And for Ellis, I think that's a great pickup for Philadelphia. And I think they're going to miss him. I think it was Ellis that I talked about for Philadelphia with the honorable mentions to Ristolainen and Yandel. So the remade blue line, right? Minnesota. For Minnesota, player I mentioned yesterday, sticking with the Ryans, Ryan Suter, who goes to Dallas. Again, Suter's bought out because of his contract, not because of his play. I truly believe that this was about his contract being cumbersome, same with Parise's, and I don't think it was because they weren't playing well. Suter played well. You can make an argument that Parise was being benched and that there were reasons for that. Suter never anywhere near that. He's still at least a top four defenseman, at least right now. And for Minnesota, moving on from him, understandable in that they wanted to make the production list more team friendly than it would have been if they'd had to protect Suter, but it's still a loss. We'll see how it goes. Dallas. The loss for Dallas, and I think this is why they brought in Luke Glendening. Jason Dickinson, who right now is a restricted free agent and is going to arbitration with the Canucks. They'll likely get a deal done before the arbitration hearing. I like Jason Dickinson. Very good defensive numbers. Again, advanced stats will say he's very good defensively. Not a lot on the offensive side, but he's still young. He's not an old player. So I'm curious to see how Dallas does without him, how Vancouver does with him, and then how Glendening does with Dallas, and whether or not he offsets the loss of Dickinson. A lot of movement this offseason. We'll see if it just ends up making huge changes in which teams are good and which teams aren't, and how much it's just reshuffling the cards and things end up very similar to what they were in previous seasons. Winnipeg, it was just, it had to be this one player. Mason Appleton, who goes to Seattle. I like Appleton a lot. I would think that Ron Francis would view him as not an untouchable. I don't think there's an untouchable on the roster for the right price, but I think the price would be high if a team wanted to pick up Appleton. And I do believe Cheveldayoff tried to find a way to keep Appleton or trade him out before the expansion draft and just couldn't find a taker. I think Winnipeg realized he was a valuable piece, just couldn't make that work, and now he's in Seattle. And again, you know, when depth guys are leaving, you need to have other guys to step in. Some teams will have an easy time with that. Some will not. St. Louis. So this is an interesting one. And again, this is another player going to Seattle. Jaden Schwartz. Jaden Schwartz may not give you tremendous scoring numbers during the regular season, but during a playoff series, he's fantastic. So if Seattle, in a division where it's possible they end up making the playoffs, if they end up in a playoff series, Jaden Schwartz could be absolutely that key player for them up front. I think St. Louis will miss him. I think that St. Louis, the farther out we get from the 2019 Cup, I think it gets more interesting to see if they're able to build back to another one using a different group of players. And, of course, Perron's going into the final year of his deal as well. So we could see even greater upheaval for St. Louis next summer. But I think losing Schwartz, I think that's tough for him. I think that it's a good pickup for Seattle. And finally, last but not least, Colorado. And for Colorado, player who I think is a huge pickup for Seattle, and that's Philip Grubauer. I mentioned it for Seattle yesterday. There are those who will say that Grubauer's numbers were because he played in Colorado, and I'll say this again, that Colorado defense kind of fell apart in the playoffs against Vegas, and it's a young defense, and I think Grubauer bailed them out as much as they bailed him out this past year, and it will be interesting to see how Colorado with Kemper does, and whether it's better or whether or not they miss Philip Grubauer, whether that's due to an injury to Kemper or whether it's because Grubauer is putting up better numbers in Seattle. That's when things get really fascinating. But let me know which player you think that a team lost in this offseason that they could miss the most. Like in Toronto, Zach Hyman would make a lot of sense as well. But let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.